Good afternoon and welcome to the Demolition Daily LiveStream. I am your host, Mark Anthony. How are you doing? I don't mean that in a Joey Tribbiani, how you doing way. I mean it in a, how are you way? Sincerely. Are you okay? Me? Oh, I'm fit and well. Thanks for asking. But cards on the table, I must admit, I'm struggling a little bit with just the enormity of the situation in which we find ourselves. Wrongly perhaps, I've got into the habit now of taking a break from the computer screen just before 5 o'clock each night so that I can watch the latest news broadcast from Downing Street. I think, like a lot of people, I suspect, I started watching these briefings out of some sort of morbid fascination, watching the COVID death toll creep inexorably higher, hoping that awful curve would flatten and then fall. It didn't, and it hasn't. And the numbers that scroll across the foot of my TV screen each night have now grown so large. I'm just running out of points of reference. 30,000 of my fellow countrymen and women dead. That's a decent sized football stadium of people that are no longer with us. More than 100,000 Americans killed. That's Barcelona's famous Camp Nou stadium, absolutely packed to the rafters. But beyond that, I just can't comprehend the numbers. I was in a crowd of 180,000 people at the Glastonbury Festival once. I can tell you from where I was, I couldn't see where the crowd started or where it ended. So 300,000 residents of Moscow potentially infected. What does that even look like? 22 million Americans unemployed. What? A UK government official was on TV last night talking about the imminent arrival of 84 tons of much needed PPE. Now, setting aside the fact that we're now measuring PPE in tons, what the hell does that even look like? What is that? 10,000 masks? 100,000? A million? I've seen a 100-ton dump truck in operation, but that was filled with rock and dirt, not with medical supplies. I guess maybe my inability to comprehend numbers beyond football stadiums or rock concert proportions is why I found myself emotionally engaged with individual cases amidst this global crisis. Maybe that's why my brain is it's my brain's way of telling me that I'm just not mentally or emotionally equipped to deal with a global pandemic, and that I can only take this much tragic news in small and slightly more manageable pieces. And maybe that's why I've started to seek solace and distraction by watching YouTube videos rather than the rolling 24-hour news. Why I'm listening to industry podcasts instead of news radio. All of that, my inability to comprehend large numbers and my bad news avoidance coalesced last night. So while my family was watching a variety of inept and unprepared hacks and journalists attempting to make sense of the senseless, I settled down to listen to the latest podcast from my mate Peter Haddock over at Content with Media. You'll find a link to the show in the description of this show, actually. With the benefit of hindsight, I probably should have watched the evening news instead, while sporting my now standard look of concerned bewilderment, because Peter's latest show hit me like a gut punch, an iron fist in a velvet glove. Now, for those of you who don't know, Peter Haddock, he is one of those endlessly and almost infuriatingly upbeat people. He speaks at 100 miles an hour, loudly. His laugh is even louder still. When Peter walks into a room, the volume automatically goes up to 11. He uses a microphone to record his show, same as I do, but he could have saved himself some money and just shouted his show out of the window. In another life, he could have been an entertainment director on a cruise ship, a man seemingly running on a heady mix of caffeine, passion, and just ceaseless enthusiasm. If you were inventing the perfect podcast host, it would look and sound a lot like Peter. His guest yesterday was Bill Hill of the Lighthouse Club, a charity that provides financial and emotional support to the construction community and their families. Now, before I get onto the subject of Peter's episode, I just wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that Peter's show is sponsored by the auction house Ritchie Brothers. Now, there's no direct correlation between an auction house and a construction podcast. No one is going to listen to Peter's show and think, oh, I must go to the next Ritchie Brothers sale and buy me an excavator. In short, they're sponsoring the Content with Media show not for direct personal gain. They're doing so to help share stories of an industry from which they, Peter, and all of us earn a living. and for that I think they should be applauded. But I digress. So the show talked about the bitter irony of the situation in which the Lighthouse Club currently finds itself. In the middle of a pandemic in which construction men, women, and their families are struggling emotionally and financially, call volumes to the Lighthouse Club are, not surprisingly, through the roof. At the same time, the coronavirus has forced the Lighthouse Club to cancel its Christmas luncheon, a massive event that put something like £250,000 in the charity's coffers. Now, all told, the industry could be facing a £1 million shortfall at a time when it needs the money the most. I'll come back to that in a second, but there's a bit of Peter's show around about the 9.5-minute mark that hit me squarely between the eyes. It's a short story that succinctly explains the stark reality of the situation facing many demolition and construction women right now. The story also encapsulates, I think, why the industry needs to back this vital charity at this time. Now, without wishing to steal Peter's thunder, the story tells of a construction worker with around 20 years' experience under his belt. He'd been laid off as a result of the current lockdown. And the guy went home to his wife and his children, and as Bill Hill puts it, he went upstairs and he didn't come back down again. Just imagine feeling so sad, so helpless and so powerless that you see suicide as your only option. For the sake of a free phone call to the Lighthouse Club charity helpline, that guy might still be here today. If he just used the Lighthouse Club's free app, his wife might still have her husband. His children might still have their father. It makes for a really tough listen, and it's somehow made tougher because the revelation quite clearly takes the wind out of Peter's always upbeat sales. So there's a few things I'd like you to do now, having listened to me waffle on for what probably feels like an eternity. First and foremost, I want you to make a note of the Lighthouse Club number, their helpline number. I can give it to you now. It should be scrolling across the screen as well. The number is 0345 605 1956, and 1956 is actually when the charity was founded. If you do nothing else today, please share that number with as many people as you possibly can. I also want you to download the Construction Industry Helpline app, or to show it to someone that you think might benefit from it. You can find it in both the Apple and the Android app stores. It's completely free. It might just help you or help somebody else. I'd also like you to listen to Peter Haddock's podcast. I'll add a link in the description to this show. I really do urge you to listen to the very end, when Peter's trademark enthusiasm just gives way in a really heart-rending, emotional ending. But I also want you to think long and hard about how you, me, and the entire industry can help this charity in its hour of need. Look, I know none of us are drowning in cash right now, with one notable exception. I haven't had any money in 8 weeks now, so I'm well aware of the situation. And I also know that after weeks of fundraising for the NHS and first responders, we're probably all suffering from a bit of charity fatigue right now. But since 1956, the Lighthouse Club has lived by the mantra: no construction worker or their family should be alone in a crisis. Without our help, the charity itself could soon be in a crisis. So how about we get together and return the favour? Now, we've got a really packed schedule for you next week. On Monday at 10:30 in the morning, much earlier than we normally broadcast, I'll be speaking to Martin Biergaard of D3 Consulting about how we deal with what he calls the climate orphans, those buildings and structures that are the last remnants of our fossil fuel past, so power stations and that kind of thing. In our more normal slot on Monday, we'll be speaking to Jacqueline O'Donovan of O'Donovan Waste Disposal. She's expressed a very public concern at a creeping complacency towards social distancing in the workplace, so I'd urge you to listen to that. And on that same subject, on Wednesday at 3, we're scheduled to speak to Leo Scott Smith of technology company Tended. In response to the need for social distancing, Leo's company has created a wearable wristband that not only alerts the wearer when they're within 2 meters of a colleague, but which also logs these encroachments, in inverted commas, on a centralized dashboard for future analysis. I really hope you can join us for some, or better still, all of those shows. Also, if like me, you're using podcasts and escape from the real world at the moment, I'm pleased to announce that our sister publications podcast, Diggers and Dozers, is now available on iTunes. I think it only went live yesterday or the day before. There's about a dozen episodes there right now, and there's a couple of brand new episodes scheduled to drop next week. So give it a listen, and if you like what you hear, please hit the subscribe button. And in case I haven't mentioned it, our very own podcast, Demolition News Radio, is also on iTunes, has been for about 3 and a bit years now. So you might like to give that one a listen too. Better still, if you are a listener, a nice 5-star review would do us a huge favour on the iTunes rankings. Okay, people, that's us done for another show and for another week. I really do appreciate you being here, probably more than you'll ever know. Broadcasting this show is helping me keep focused and keep positive as best I can. So I do appreciate you being there. Stay safe. Look after yourself. Look after your family, your friends, and your colleagues. We'll be back next week. And that Lighthouse Club hotline number again, 0345 605 1956. If you're struggling, please call them. The number's on the screen there. As soon as this show ends, I'll be putting this show over on YouTube, so you can catch up with it there. If you can't get the number down in time, you can pause it over there. Please take the number, download the app, and let's get behind the Lighthouse Club, because they've been behind us for, I can't do the maths off the top of my head, but 70 odd years. So let's get behind the Lighthouse Club. Go give Peter's podcast a listen, and I'll see you again 10:30 a.m. on Monday. Have a great weekend, everyone. Cheers.